The ground shook so violently that Harlan Xander thought for a moment the earth itself had decided to swallow the village whole. And when the dust finally settled and the screaming began, he realized with horror that half the eastern wall had collapsed into a crater of broken stone and splintered timber. He had been working in the fields when the explosion rattled through the valley. Some catastrophic failure in the old mining tunnels beneath the border settlement of Thornreach that had turned solid ground into a death trap. Now he ran toward the devastation with dozens of others, his heart hammering against his ribs as he took in the scope of the destruction. Buildings had crumbled. People were buried. Somewhere in that chaos, lives hung in the balance. Harlan was not a soldier, though he had been once. At 26, he had seen enough of war to know he wanted no more of it, and he had come to Thornreach precisely because it was a quiet place where human farmers and the occasional orc trader could coexist without the constant threat of bloodshed. He had bought a small plot of land, built a modest cabin, and spent his days tending crops and trying to forget the things he had done in service to a kingdom that cared nothing for men like him. But old instincts died hard, and as he reached the edge of the collapse, he found himself automatically assessing the situation with the cool detachment of someone trained to function in crisis. The eastern wall had been part of the old fortifications, a relic from decades past when Thornreach had been a military outpost. Most of it had been repurposed into housing for the poorest residents, which meant orcs, half-breeds, and the occasional desperate human who had nowhere else to go. Harlan felt his stomach twist as he realized what that meant. The people most likely buried under that rubble were the ones no one else would care about. Already he could see some of the human villagers hesitating, their faces torn between duty and prejudice. A few began pulling at stones near where they knew human families lived. Others simply stood and stared. Harlan did not hesitate. He moved toward the largest pile of rubble where the collapse seemed deepest and began hauling away chunks of masonry with his bare hands. The stones were rough and cut into his palms, but he ignored the pain. Someone nearby shouted at him to be careful, that the whole structure could come down, but Harlan had already committed. He worked methodically, moving the largest pieces first to create access, then digging deeper into the smaller debris. Dust coated his throat and lungs, making every breath taste like ash. He had cleared perhaps 3 feet of rubble when he heard it. A groan, faint and muffled, coming from somewhere beneath the stones. Harlan froze, straining his ears. There it was again, definitely a voice, definitely alive. He redoubled his efforts, throwing stones aside with increasing urgency. His fingers were bleeding now, the skin torn and raw, but he barely noticed. The voice grew louder, more distinct, and he realized it was female. She was calling for help in a language he recognized as Orcish, though his understanding of it was limited to a few basic phrases learned during his military service. "I hear you," he shouted down into the rubble. "Keep making noise so I can find you." The response was immediate, a stream of what sounded like curses or prayers, he could not tell which. But the voice gave him a direction, and he focused his digging on that spot, pulling away stone after stone until his hands closed on something that was not rock. Fabric. He tugged gently, afraid of causing further collapse, and felt resistance. She was pinned. Harlan dropped to his knees and began digging more carefully, using his hands like shovels to clear away smaller pieces of debris. The sun was beating down on his back, and sweat mixed with dust to create a grimy paste on his skin. His muscles screamed in protest, but he did not stop. He could see her now, just barely. Green skin, dark hair matted with dust and blood. An orc woman, young, trapped beneath a massive wooden beam that had fallen across her torso and legs. "I see you," he said, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "I am going to get you out, but I need you to stay still. Can you understand me?" The orc woman turned her head slightly, and he found himself looking into eyes the color of burnished copper. She was terrified. He could see that plainly, but there was also a fierceness in her gaze that spoke of determination. She said something in Orcish that he did not understand, then seemed to realize he could not follow. She tried again in heavily accented Common. "Beam. Too heavy." "I know," Harlan said. He looked around desperately for help, but the nearest villagers were still focused on their own rescue efforts. He could not blame them, but it meant he was alone in this. He turned back to the orc woman and tried to assess the situation. The beam was massive, easily several 100 pounds, and it had fallen at an angle that pinned her lower body completely. If he tried to simply lift it, he might cause more rubble to shift and crush her. He needed leverage. There was a piece of iron rebar jutting from the rubble a few feet away, part of the old fortification's reinforcement. Harlan crawled over to it and worked it free, then brought it back to the beam. He wedged one end of the rebar beneath the wood and braced the other end against a stable piece of masonry. It was not much, but it might give him the leverage he needed. "When I lift this, you need to pull yourself free," he said, locking eyes with the orc woman. "It is going to hurt, but you have to move fast. Do you understand?" She nodded once, her jaw set with determination. Harlan positioned himself at the rebar and began to push down, using his full body weight. The beam shifted, rising perhaps an inch. The orc woman gasped in pain but did not scream. Harlan pushed harder, his vision blurring with the effort. The beam rose another inch, 2 inches. "Now," he shouted. The orc woman began to drag herself backward, using her arms to pull her body out from under the beam. Harlan could see the agony on her face, but she did not stop. Her legs came free just as his strength gave out, and the beam crashed back down with a sound like thunder. Harlan stumbled backward, his arms shaking, and nearly fell into the rubble himself. He caught himself at the last moment and looked over to see the orc woman lying on her side, breathing hard, her face pale beneath the green of her skin. He moved to her side immediately, checking her for injuries. Her legs were badly bruised and possibly broken, though he could not tell without a proper examination. There was blood on her temple where something had struck her, and her clothing was torn and filthy. But she was alive, and that was what mattered. "Can you move your legs?" he asked. She tried, wincing, and managed to shift her right leg slightly. The left did not respond at all. "Left is broken," she said through gritted teeth. "I can feel it," Harlan nodded. "We need to get you out of here before more of this comes down. I am going to carry you. It is going to hurt." "Everything hurts," she said, and there was a grim humor in her voice that surprised him. "Do what you must." He slid his arms beneath her as gently as he could, one under her shoulders and one under her knees, and lifted. She was heavy, all muscle and solid bone, but he had carried wounded soldiers before and knew how to distribute the weight. She made a small sound of pain as he shifted her, but she did not cry out. Harlan began to pick his way back through the rubble, moving carefully to avoid unstable footing. Every step jostled her, and he could feel her body tensing against the pain, but she did not complain. By the time he reached stable ground, a small crowd had gathered. Most were human, and Harlan could see the disapproval on their faces as they realized what he was carrying. One of them, a middle-aged man named Garrett who ran the general store, stepped forward with a frown. "You are wasting your time with that one, Xander," Garrett said. "The healer is already overwhelmed with our own people. She can take her chances with the rest of the greenskins." Harlan felt anger flare hot in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "She is a person, Garrett. She was buried alive, and I am not leaving her to die because you have a problem with her blood." "It is not about blood, it is about priorities," Garrett shot back. "We have limited supplies, limited space. Why should we waste it on someone who probably would not do the same for us?" The orc woman stirred in Harlan's arms, and he felt her tense as if preparing to speak, but he cut her off. "Because it is the right thing to do. And if that does not matter to you, then consider this. I just risked my life to pull her out of that rubble. If you turn her away now, you are spitting on that effort, and I will remember it." There was a long silence. Garrett's face flushed with anger, but he stepped aside. Harlan did not wait for further argument. He carried the orc woman toward the healer's tent, which had been set up in the village square. The healer, an older woman named Marta, looked up as he entered, and her expression tightened when she saw his burden. "I do not have the supplies for this," Marta said immediately. "I have 3 humans with crush injuries, 2 children with broken bones, and more coming in by the minute." "Then tell me what to do, and I will do it myself," Harlan said. He laid the orc woman down on an empty cot in the corner, ignoring Marta's protest. "I am not leaving her untreated." Marta studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You always were stubborn, Xander. Fine. Check her for internal bleeding first. If her belly is rigid or swelling, there is nothing we can do anyway. If not, splint the leg and clean the head wound. There is a kit in the corner." Harlan nodded and moved to retrieve the medical kit. When he returned, the orc woman was watching him with an unreadable expression. He knelt beside the cot and met her eyes. "I need to check for internal injuries," he said. "I am going to press on your stomach. Tell me if anything feels wrong." She nodded, and he gently palpated her abdomen, watching her face for signs of distress. She flinched a few times, but there was no rigidity, no indication of internal bleeding. He moved on to her legs, cutting away the torn fabric of her trousers to expose the injury. The left leg was definitely broken, a clean fracture just below the knee. It could have been worse. He worked in silence, splinting the leg as carefully as he could and wrapping it with strips of clean cloth. The orc woman did not make a sound, though he knew the pain must have been excruciating. When he was finished with the leg, he moved to her head, cleaning the wound on her temple and applying a bandage. Only then did he allow himself to sit back and take a breath. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated, as if debating whether to answer. Finally, she said, "Hagna, Hagna Hragath." "I am Harlan Xander," he said. "You are going to be all right, Hagna. The leg will heal." "Why did you do it?" she asked suddenly. Her copper eyes were fixed on his face, searching. "You do not know me. I am Orc. Your people hate us." "Not all of us," Harlan said. He looked down at his torn and bloody hands, flexing his fingers despite the pain. "And even if they did, it would not matter. You needed help. I could provide it. That is all the reason I need." Hagna was silent for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Thank you." Harlan nodded. He did not know what else to say. The weight of the day was beginning to catch up with him, exhaustion settling into his bones like lead. Around them, the healer's tent was a chaos of activity, people crying out in pain, Marta barking orders at volunteers. He knew he should get up, should help with the others, but for just a moment he allowed himself to sit and simply breathe. "You should go," Hagna said, as if reading his thoughts. "There are others who need you." "There are," he agreed, but he did not move. Something in him resisted the idea of leaving her alone in this place where she was so clearly unwanted. "But they have help. You do not." "I do not need a guardian," she said, and there was a flash of that fierceness again. "I can take care of myself." "I am sure you can," Harlan said. "But you should not have to, not right now." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she closed her eyes and turned her face away. "Do what you want," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. Harlan stayed. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. The village of Thornreach struggled to recover from the disaster, and Harlan threw himself into the work. He helped clear rubble, rebuild homes, and tend to the injured. But every evening, without fail, he returned to the healer's tent to check on Hagna. Most of the other injured had been moved to their own homes or the homes of relatives, but Hagna had nowhere to go. The building she had been living in was completely destroyed, and she had no family in Thornreach. Marta tolerated her presence with grudging resignation, but it was clear she wanted the orc woman gone as soon as possible. Harlan knew that without intervention, Hagna would be turned out onto the street long before her leg was healed. The thought bothered him more than he cared to admit. On the 4th day after the collapse, he made a decision. "You are coming to stay with me," he said to Hagna, his tone leaving no room for argument. She looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious," he said. "You need a place to recover, and I have space. My cabin is small, but there is a spare room. You can stay until your leg heals." "The village will talk," she said. "A human man and an orc woman living together, they will say terrible things." "Let them talk," Harlan said. "I do not care what they think." "You should care," Hagna said, and there was a sharpness in her voice now. "You have to live here. I will not be the reason you are cast out." Harlan sat down on the edge of her cot and met her eyes. "Hagna, listen to me. I have seen what happens when people decide someone is not worth caring about. I have seen it in war, and I have seen it here. I will not be part of it. If the village wants to cast me out for giving you a place to heal, then so be it. But I will not leave you to suffer because I am afraid of gossip." She stared at him, her expression conflicted. Finally, she said, "You are a fool." "Probably," he agreed with a faint smile. "But I am a fool with a spare room and a stubborn streak, so what do you say?" Hagna closed her eyes and let out a long breath. "Fine, but only until I can walk again. Then I leave." "Fair enough," Harlan said. He made arrangements with Marta, who seemed relieved to be rid of her orc patient, and borrowed a cart from one of the other farmers. Getting Hagna into the cart was a challenge. Her broken leg made movement difficult, but they managed. Harlan drove slowly, mindful of every bump and rut in the road. Hagna sat in the back, her face stoic despite what must have been considerable pain. His cabin was about a mile outside the village proper, nestled at the edge of a small wood. It was a simple structure, built with his own hands, but it was sturdy and weatherproof. He had 2 rooms, a main living area that served as both kitchen and common space, and a smaller bedroom in the back. He had been sleeping on a pallet in the main room for the past year anyway, having turned the bedroom into storage, so it was no great sacrifice to clear it out for Hagna. He carried her inside and laid her on the bed, which he had hastily fitted with clean sheets. She looked around the small room, taking in the rough wooden walls and the single window that looked out onto the forest. "It is not much," Harlan said, suddenly self-conscious. "It is better than a tent," Hagna said, "and better than being dead under rubble, thank you." Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Harlan would wake at dawn and tend to his fields, then return to prepare meals and check on Hagna's progress. He was not much of a cook, but he knew how to make simple, hearty food, and Hagna never complained. She spent most of her time resting, allowing her body to heal, but as the days passed, she grew stronger and more mobile. She began to insist on helping where she could, peeling vegetables or mending clothes, tasks that could be done sitting down. They did not talk much at first. Harlan was not used to having company, and Hagna seemed content with silence. But gradually, as the initial awkwardness faded, they began to share small pieces of their lives. Hagna told him about her clan, which had been driven from their traditional lands by human expansion, and now lived as wanderers and outcasts. She had come to Thornreach hoping to find work and a measure of stability, but the collapse had destroyed what little she had managed to build. Harlan, in turn, told her about his time as a soldier, though he kept the details vague. He spoke of disillusionment and the decision to leave, of wanting something quieter and more meaningful than endless conflict. Hagna listened without judgment, and he found himself appreciating that more than he had expected. One evening, about 3 weeks after she had moved in, Harlan was preparing dinner when Hagna spoke up from her seat by the fire. "Why did you really leave the army?" she asked. He paused, his hand stilling over the pot he was stirring. It was a question he had been asked before, and he had always deflected it. But something about the way Hagna asked, direct and without preamble, made him want to answer honestly. "I killed someone I should not have," he said quietly. "We were raiding an orc settlement, trying to root out what command said were insurgents. There was a woman there, older, unarmed. She tried to protect a child, probably her grandchild. My commanding officer ordered me to shoot her. I hesitated, and he shot her himself. Then he ordered me to burn the house with the child still inside." The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Harlan did not look at Hagna, could not bear to see whatever expression was on her face. "I did not do it," he continued. "I refused the order. I was court-martialed for insubordination, but they let me go rather than make a public spectacle of it. The official story was that I was discharged for medical reasons. I took the discharge and never looked back." "What happened to the child?" Hagna asked softly. "I do not know," Harlan said. "I like to think someone else showed mercy, but I will never know for sure." He felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to find that Hagna had gotten up from her chair, balancing on her good leg and using the wall for support. She had crossed the room without him noticing, and now she stood beside him, her copper eyes solemn. "That woman and that child," she said, "they were my people, and you chose to protect them even when it cost you everything. I will not forget that." Harlan felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of guilt and shame that he had carried for so long he had forgotten it was there. He reached up and placed his hand over hers, squeezing gently. "Thank you," he said. They stood like that for a moment, and Harlan felt the air between them shift, becoming charged with something he could not quite name. Then Hagna pulled her hand away and hobbled back to her chair, and the moment passed. But something had changed. As the weeks turned into a month and then 2, Hagna's leg healed. She began to walk again, first with a crutch and then without, though she still favored the injured leg slightly. She grew restless with inactivity and insisted on helping with the farm work, despite Harlan's protests. He found her one morning carrying water from the well, her face set with determination, and realized that arguing with her was pointless. "You are stubborn," he said. "So are you," she replied, and there was a hint of amusement in her voice. They worked together in the fields, Hagna proving herself to be strong and capable despite her recent injury. She knew plants and soil, she told him, having grown up in a clan that survived by farming and foraging in the wild places where humans would not go. Her knowledge complemented his, and together they managed to coax a good harvest from the small plot of land. The villagers noticed, of course. Harlan could feel their eyes on him whenever he went into Thornreach for supplies, could hear the whispers that stopped just as he came within earshot. He ignored them as best he could, but he knew that Hagna was aware of the hostility. She never accompanied him into the village, and he did not push her to. One afternoon in late summer, Harlan was in the village square purchasing seed for the next planting when Garrett approached him. The storekeeper's face was set in a scowl. "People are talking, Xander," Garrett said without preamble. "They are saying you are living with that orc woman, that you are taking her side over your own people." I am not taking anyone's side, Harlan said evenly. I am helping someone who needed help, that is all. That is not all, and you know it, Garrett said. You are making the rest of us look bad. We have enough problems without you bringing shame on the village. Harlan felt anger surge through him, hot and immediate. Shame. What is shameful is the way this village treated her after the collapse. She was buried alive, Garrett. I dug her out with my bare hands. And the first thing people did was argue about whether she deserved to be saved. If that does not shame you, then I do not know what will. She is an orc, Garrett said, as if that explained everything. They are not like us. They do not think like us, do not feel like us. You cannot trust them. You are wrong, Harlan said. I have spent more time with Hagna in the past 2 months than I have with anyone in this village. And she is more honest and honorable than most humans I have known, including you. Garrett's face flushed red with fury. Fine. If that is how you feel, then maybe you should leave Thornreach. Go live with the orcs if you love them so much. Maybe I will, Harlan said. He picked up his supplies and walked away, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. When he returned to the cabin, he found Hagna sitting outside, sharpening a blade she used for cutting vegetables. She looked up as he approached and must have seen something in his face because her expression immediately grew concerned. What happened? She asked. The village elders want me gone, he said, not bothering to soften the truth. Or at least, they want you gone. They think I am betraying my people by helping you. Hagna set down the blade and stood. Then I will leave. I told you from the beginning that this would happen. I will not let you lose everything because of me. No, Harlan said, more sharply than he intended. You are not leaving. Harlan, be reasonable. You have a life here, I have nothing. It makes no sense for you to sacrifice what you have built. I do not care, he said. He stepped closer to her, and she did not back away. I do not care what the village thinks. I do not care if they cast me out. The only thing I care about is that you are safe and healthy, and I am not letting you walk away just because a bunch of narrow-minded fools cannot see past their own prejudice. Hagna stared at him, her eyes wide. Why? She asked, and her voice was barely a whisper. Why do you care so much? Harlan opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Because the truth was, he did not have a simple answer. Or rather, he did, but it was a truth he had been avoiding for weeks now. He cared because somewhere along the way, Hagna had stopped being a responsibility and started being something else. Something important, something he could not imagine living without. Because, he said slowly, choosing his words with care, because you matter to me. Because I wake up every morning and the first thing I think about is whether you are comfortable, whether you are happy. Because when I am in the fields, I look forward to coming back, not to my cabin, but to you. Because I have never met anyone as strong or as brave as you, and I do not want to lose that. I do not want to lose you. The silence that followed was absolute. Hagna's face was unreadable, her copper eyes searching his. Then, very quietly, she said, You cannot mean that. I do, Harlan said. I know it is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea, but I do not care about any of them. All I care about is you. Hagna looked away, her jaw working as if she were struggling with something. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I feel the same way. I have tried not to. I have told myself that it is foolish, that it can never work, but I cannot stop. Every time you smile at me, every time you go out of your way to make sure I am comfortable, I feel something I have never felt before, and it terrifies me. Harlan reached out and gently turned her face back toward him. Her skin was warm beneath his fingers, and he could feel the tension in her body. It terrifies me too, he admitted, but I would rather be terrified with you than safe without you. Hagna closed her eyes, and he saw a tear slip down her cheek. He wiped it away with his thumb, and when she opened her eyes again, they were bright with emotion. She leaned forward, and he met her halfway, their lips touching in a kiss that was tentative at first, then growing in intensity. She tasted like wood smoke and something wild, and Harlan felt as though he were drowning in the best possible way. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. Hagner rested her forehead against his, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "What do we do now?" she asked. "I do not know," Harlan admitted, "but we will figure it out together." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Harlan's life. He and Hagna fell into a new rhythm, one that acknowledged the depth of their feelings without forcing them to confront the reality of what those feelings meant. They worked together during the day, ate together in the evenings, and at night they lay together in the small bedroom, talking until sleep claimed them. Harlan learned the contours of her body, the places that made her laugh and the ones that made her gasp. Hagna, in turn, showed him a tenderness and passion he had never known, but the outside world could not be ignored forever. As autumn approached, the hostility from the village grew more overt. Twice, someone left a dead animal on Harlan's doorstep, a crude message of disapproval. Once, a group of young men blocked his path in the village and made veiled threats. Harlan met each incident with calm determination, refusing to be intimidated. But he knew that the situation could not continue indefinitely. It came to a head on a cold morning in early autumn. Harlan was returning from the village with supplies when he saw smoke rising from the direction of his cabin. His blood turned to ice, and he broke into a run, the supplies forgotten. By the time he reached the clearing, the cabin was fully engulfed in flames. Hagna was standing outside, her face streaked with soot, clutching a few salvaged belongings. "What happened?" he demanded, rushing to her side. "I do not know," she said, her voice shaking. "I was in the garden, and when I came back it was already burning. I tried to put it out, but it was too far gone." Harlan turned to look at the cabin, his heart sinking. Everything he had built, everything he owned, was disappearing into ash, but the only thing that truly mattered was standing beside him, alive and safe. "Did you see anyone?" he asked. "No. But I think it was deliberate. The fire started in two places at once." Harlan felt rage boil up inside him, but he forced it down. Anger would not help them now. "We need to leave," he said. "If they are willing to burn down my home, they will not stop there." "Where will we go?" Hagna asked. Harlan thought quickly. "There is a settlement to the north near the border. It is mixed, humans and orcs living together. We can go there." "That is weeks of travel," Hagna said, "and winter is coming. I know, but we do not have a choice." They gathered what little they could salvage and set out that same day. The journey north was grueling. They traveled mostly on foot, sleeping rough when they could not find shelter. Harlan had a small amount of money saved, enough to buy food and the occasional night in a barn or stable. They avoided the main roads, wary of bandits and hostile travelers. The first week was the hardest. They were both exhausted, physically and emotionally, and the weight of what they had lost hung heavy over them. But gradually, as they put distance between themselves and Thornreach, the tension began to ease. They found a rhythm in the travel, a quiet companionship that did not require words. One evening, as they sat by a campfire in a small clearing, Hagna spoke up. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Losing everything because of me?" Harlan looked at her, at the way the firelight danced across her green skin, at the determination in her copper eyes. "No," he said simply. "I would do it all again." She smiled, a small, genuine smile that made his heart ache. "You are a fool, Harlan Xander." "So you have said," he replied, grinning, "but I am your fool." "Yes," she said softly, "you are." They reached the northern settlement 3 weeks later, just as the first snows began to fall. It was called Imberfall, a place where humans and orcs lived side by side, not always in perfect harmony but with a mutual respect born of necessity. The settlement was larger than Thornreach, with proper defenses and a thriving market. Harlan and Hagna found lodging in a communal house while they looked for more permanent accommodations. The people of Imberfall were wary of newcomers, but they were also pragmatic. Harlan's farming skills and Hagna's knowledge of wilderness survival made them valuable additions to the community. Within a month, they had secured a small plot of land on the outskirts of the settlement and begun building a new cabin. This one was larger than the last, with space for both of them and room to grow. As winter deepened, they worked side by side, shaping their new life with the same determination that had carried them through the journey north. The people of Imberfall gradually accepted them, and Harlan found himself forming friendships with both humans and orcs. Hagna, too, seemed to flourish in the new environment. She smiled more, laughed more, and the haunted look that had lingered in her eyes since the collapse finally began to fade. One evening in midwinter, as they sat by the fire in their new home, Harlan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a ring, crudely made from a piece of iron he had shaped himself. It was not much, but it was all he had to offer. "Hagna," he said, and his voice was unsteady. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know that what we have is complicated and difficult, but I also know that I love you. I love you more than I have ever loved anything or anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." He held out the ring, his heart pounding. Hagna stared at it, her eyes wide. Then she looked up at him, and he saw tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will have you. I will always have you." Harlan slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him into a fierce embrace. They held each other for a long time, the fire crackling beside them, and Harlan felt a peace settle over him that he had never known before. They were married a month later, in a small ceremony attended by a handful of friends from Imberfall. It was nothing grand, just a simple exchange of vows witnessed by people who cared about them. But it was perfect. Hagna wore a dress she had sewn herself, dyed a deep green that complemented her skin. Harlan wore his best clothes, freshly cleaned and mended. When the officiant pronounced them married, they kissed to the sound of cheers and laughter. The seasons turned, and life in Imberfall continued. Harlan and Hagna built a life together, one that was not without its challenges but was filled with love and purpose. They expanded their farm, planting crops and raising animals. Hagna proved to be an exceptional hunter, bringing in game to supplement their stores. Harlan, in turn, used his skills to help other settlers improve their own farms. In the spring, they received word that Thornreach had been abandoned. The collapse had been the first in a series of disasters, and the settlement had never recovered. Harlan felt a pang of sadness for the place that had once been his home, but he did not regret leaving. His life was here now with Hagna. By the time summer arrived, Hagna's stomach had begun to swell with the first signs of pregnancy. Harlan was overjoyed, and Hagna, despite her initial nervousness, seemed to glow with happiness. They spent long evenings talking about the future, about the child they would raise together. Harlan was determined that their child would grow up in a world where love mattered more than blood, where the old prejudices held no power. The pregnancy was not easy. Hagna was sick often in the early months, and as her belly grew, she found it harder to move and work. But she never complained, and Harlan did everything he could to make her comfortable. He took over the heavier tasks, insisted she rest, and brought her little treats from the market to make her smile. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set, Hagna turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "The day you dug me out of the rubble." "All the time," Harlan admitted. "It was the day my life changed." "Mine too," Hagna said. She reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I thought I was going to die there. I had accepted it. And then I heard you, this human man who did not know me, who had no reason to care, digging with his bare hands to save me. I did not understand it then, but I understand it now." "What do you understand?" Harlan asked. "That love is not about blood or species or any of the things people say matter," Hagna said. "It is about seeing someone in pain and choosing to help. It is about standing beside someone even when the world tells you not to. It is about believing that every life has value, even when others do not. You taught me that, Harlan, and I will never forget it." Harlan felt his throat tighten with emotion. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You taught me something too," he said. "You taught me that it is possible to start over, to build something new from the ashes of the old. You taught me that love is stronger than fear and that it is worth fighting for, no matter the cost." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Harlan thought about how far they had come, from that desperate moment in the rubble to this quiet evening in their home. It had not been easy, and he knew there would be more challenges ahead. But he also knew that they would face them together as they had faced everything else. When autumn came, Hagna went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth, and Harlan spent every moment by her side, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. The midwife, an older orc woman named Grisha, worked with calm efficiency, guiding Hagna through the process. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a baby's cry filled the air. "It is a girl," Grisha announced, holding up the tiny, squirming infant. Harlan looked down at his daughter, at her green skin and the tiny tusks just beginning to show, and felt his heart swell with a love so intense it was almost painful. Hagner reached out weakly, and Grisha placed the baby in her arms. Hagna looked down at the child, tears streaming down her face, and smiled. "She is beautiful," Hagna whispered. "She is perfect," Harlan agreed. They named her Hope because that was what she represented. Hope for a better future. Hope for a world where love could triumph over hate. Hope that the sacrifices they had made would not be in vain. As the years passed, Hope grew into a bright, curious child. She had her mother's fierce determination and her father's kindness, and she was loved by everyone in Imberfall. Harlan and Hagna watched her grow with pride, teaching her about the world and the values they held dear. They told her the story of how they met, of the rubble and the fire and the long journey north. They wanted her to understand that love was not always easy, but it was always worth it. The farm prospered, and Harlan and Hagna became respected members of the Imberfall community. They took in others who were fleeing prejudice and persecution, offering them shelter and support. Their home became a place of refuge, a symbol of what was possible when people chose compassion over fear. One spring morning, when Hope was 5 years old, she came running up to Harlan with a handful of wildflowers. "Papa, look what I found," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. Harlan knelt down to admire the flowers, his heart full. "They are beautiful just like you," he said, kissing her forehead. Hagna appeared in the doorway, smiling at the sight of them. "Come inside, both of you. Breakfast is ready." As they walked into the cabin together, Harlan felt a profound sense of gratitude. He thought about the man he had been, lost and disillusioned, and the man he had become. He thought about the rubble and the desperation, the decision to dig with his bare hands because someone needed help. That decision had changed everything. He looked at Hagna, at the way the morning light caught in her hair, at the love in her eyes. He looked at Hope, running ahead with her flowers, her laughter filling the air. This was his family. This was his home. And it had all started with a single act of compassion. Years continued to pass, and their family grew. Hagna gave birth to 2 more children, a boy they named Heath and another girl they named Honor. Each child was a blessing, each one a testament to the love that had brought Harlan and Hagna together. The children grew up knowing both human and orc traditions, learning to navigate a world that was slowly, painfully, beginning to change. Emberfall itself grew as well. More refugees arrived, drawn by stories of a place where different peoples could live together in peace. The settlement expanded, and with it, a new culture emerged, one that blended the best of human and orc traditions. Harlan and Hagna were often called upon to mediate disputes or offer advice, their story having become something of a legend in the community. One evening, when Hope was 16 and preparing to take on more responsibilities in the community, she came to her parents with a question. "Mama, Papa," she said, sitting down at the table where they were having tea, "do you ever regret it, leaving Thornreach, giving up everything you had?" Harlan and Hagna exchanged a glance. Then Harlan reached over and took Hagna's hand. "Not for a single moment," he said. "Everything we gave up, we gained back 1,000 times over. We have each other, we have you and your siblings, we have a home and a community that values us. What more could we want?" "But it must have been so hard," Hope said, "to be hated just for loving each other." "It was hard," Hagna admitted. "There were times I wanted to give up, times I thought it would be easier to just walk away, but your father would not let me. He showed me that love is not something to be ashamed of, no matter what others say. And that lesson, that gift, is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life." Hope nodded slowly, absorbing their words. "I am proud to be your daughter," she said, "both of yours. And I hope that when I find love, I will be as brave as you were." "You will be," Harlan said with certainty. "You are already braver than you know." As the seasons turned once more, Harlan began to feel the weight of his years. He was not old, not yet, but the hard labor of farming and the stress of the early years had taken their toll. He found himself moving more slowly, needing more rest. Hagna noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You should take it easier," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Let the children handle more of the work." "I am fine," Harlan protested, but even he could hear the lack of conviction in his voice. "You are not fine," Hagna said gently, "and that is all right. We have built something here, Harlan, something that will last long after we are gone. You do not have to carry the whole weight of it anymore." Harlan looked at her, at the silver beginning to show in her hair, at the lines around her eyes that spoke of years of laughter and tears. She was as beautiful to him now as she had been that first day in the rubble, perhaps more so. "When did you get so wise?" he asked with a smile. "I learned from the best," she replied, leaning over to kiss him. They did begin to slow down, letting their children take on more responsibility. Hope proved to be a natural leader, and Heath had a gift for working with his hands, building and repairing things with ease. Honor, the youngest, had a way with words and became a storyteller, preserving the history of Emberfall and the people who had built it. One day, a delegation from a nearby human settlement arrived in Emberfall. They had heard stories of the community and wanted to learn how humans and orcs could live together peacefully. Harlan and Hagna were asked to speak to them, to share their story. They stood before the delegation in the community hall, and Harlan felt a flutter of nervousness. He was not used to public speaking, but Hagna squeezed his hand, and he found his courage. "Our story is not unique," he began. It is the story of two people who found each other in the worst possible circumstances and chose to hold on. It is the story of believing that every life has value, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. And it is the story of refusing to let fear and hatred dictate our choices. Hagna took over, her voice strong and clear. We have built a life here based on respect and compassion. It has not always been easy. There have been conflicts and misunderstandings. But we have learned that when we approach each other with open hearts, when we choose to see the person rather than the label, we can build something beautiful. The delegation listened intently, asking questions and taking notes. By the end of the meeting, several of them were openly weeping, moved by the story they had heard. One woman, a human in her 40s, approached Harlan and Hagna afterward. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My daughter is in love with an orc man. I have been fighting it, afraid of what people will say. But after hearing your story, I realize I was wrong. Love is love, and I should be supporting her, not standing in her way." Harlan felt tears prick his own eyes. "Tell her that she has our blessing," he said, "and that she is not alone. There are more of us than you might think, people who believe that love is worth fighting for." The woman nodded and left, and Harlan turned to Hagna. "Did we really just change someone's mind?" he asked, awed. "I think we did," Hagna said, smiling. "Maybe our story is more important than we realized." As the years continued to pass, Harlan and Hagna became elders in the community, their wisdom sought after and their presence cherished. They watched as Imberfall grew into a true city, a place where humans, orcs, and even other species could come together in peace. They saw their children marry and have children of their own, each generation carrying forward the values that Harlan and Hagna had instilled in them. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin, now expanded and renovated many times over, Harlan looked out at the bustling streets of Imberfall and felt a deep sense of contentment. "We did it," he said softly. "Did what?" Hagna asked, though he suspected she knew. "We built something that will outlast us," he said. "Something good and true, and it all started because I could not leave you buried under that rubble." Hagna leaned her head on his shoulder. "And it continued because you chose to love me, even when it was hard, even when it cost you everything." "It cost me nothing that mattered," Harlan said, "and it gave me everything I needed." They sat in silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Around them, the sounds of the city continued, children laughing, people calling out to one another, the clatter of carts on the cobblestones. It was the sound of life, of community, of hope. Harlan thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that desperate moment in the rubble to this peaceful evening. He thought about the fear and the pain, the anger and the loss. But most of all, he thought about the love, the fierce, unshakable love that had carried them through it all. "I love you, Hagna Xander," he said, using the name she had taken when they married. "And I love you, Harlan Xander," she replied, "now and always." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Harlan felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had been given a gift, the chance to save someone who needed saving, and in doing so, he had saved himself. He had learned that love was not bound by species or tradition, that it could flourish in the most unlikely places, and that it was worth any sacrifice. Their story, he knew, would be told for generations. It would be a reminder that compassion and courage could change the world, one act of kindness at a time. And it would be a testament to the power of love, the kind of love that refused to be denied, that overcame every obstacle, and that endured long after the rubble had been cleared away. Harlan squeezed Hagna's hand, and she squeezed back. They sat together as the night deepened, two souls bound by a love that had begun in the darkest moment, and had grown into something bright and enduring. And as they sat, surrounded by the life they had built, they knew that they had found what every person searches for: a place to belong, someone to love, and a purpose worth fighting for. The years that followed were gentle. Harlan and Hagna continued to live in Emberfall, their presence a constant source of strength for the community. They watched their grandchildren grow, delighting in each new milestone. They tended a small garden behind their home, growing flowers and herbs that Hagna used for cooking and medicine. One spring morning, many years after that fateful day in the rubble, Harlan woke to find Hagna already up, standing at the window and looking out at the garden. He rose and joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was thinking about how lucky I am," she said. "To have found you, to have lived this life. I never imagined when I was young and wandering with my clan that I could be this happy." "Neither did I," Harlan said. "I thought I would spend my life alone, haunted by the things I had done. But you saved me, Hagna, just as much as I saved you that day." She turned in his arms and looked up at him, her copper eyes still as bright and fierce as they had been all those years ago. "We saved each other," she said, "and we will keep saving each other every day for as long as we live." Harlan kissed her, a soft, lingering kiss that spoke of decades of love and trust. When they pulled apart, they both smiled. "Come on," Hagna said. "Let us go tend the garden. Those flowers will not plant themselves." They walked out into the morning light together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the day would bring. And as they worked side by side, as they had done so many times before, Harlan felt a peace settle over him that went bone deep. This was his life. This was his love. And it had all started with a simple choice: to dig through rubble with his bare hands and save a life. Everything else, all the beauty and joy and purpose that had followed, had grown from that one act of compassion. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming their backs and illuminating the garden in golden light, Harlan knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choice again. Every single time, because love, true love, was worth any price. And in the end, that was the only lesson that mattered. Their story was one of courage and compassion, of two people who refused to let the world tell them who they could love. It was a story of overcoming prejudice and fear, of building something beautiful from the ashes of destruction. And it was a story that would be told and retold, inspiring others to believe that love could conquer all. Harlan and Hagna lived out the rest of their days in happiness and contentment, surrounded by family and friends, their legacy secured in the thriving community they had helped build. And when their time finally came to leave this world, they did so together, their hands clasped, their hearts at peace. The people of Emberfall mourned their passing, but they also celebrated the lives they had lived. A monument was erected in the town square, depicting Harlan digging through rubble to reach Hagna, a permanent reminder of the moment that had changed everything. And carved into the base of the monument were simple words that captured the essence of their story. Love sees no barriers. Compassion knows no bounds. Generations later, when children asked about the monument, they were told the story of Harlan and Hagna, of the human man who refused to leave an orc woman to die, and the love that blossomed from that act of mercy. The story became a part of Emberfall's identity, a founding myth that reminded everyone of the values upon which the city had been built. And so, even though Harlan and Hagna were gone, their love endured. It lived on in their descendants, in the community they had nurtured, and in the hearts of everyone who heard their story and believed that love, true love, could change the world. Their journey had begun in rubble and dust, with a desperate act of kindness. It had continued through fire and exile, through hardship and joy. And it had ended in peace and fulfillment, two souls united in a bond that nothing could break. It was a love story for the ages, a reminder that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places. And it all started with a simple truth, that every life has value and that love is always worth fighting for. Harlan had dug through rubble with his bare hands to free Hagna, and in doing so, he had freed them both. He had given her a future, and she had given him a purpose. Together, they had built a life that was rich and full, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring strength of love, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. Not the prejudice they had faced, not the sacrifices they had made, but the love they had shared and the legacy they had left behind. It was a love that had started in darkness and grown into light, a love that had changed not just two lives, but an entire community. Their story was complete, their journey at an end. But the impact of what they had done, the lives they had touched, would ripple outward for generations to come. And somewhere, in the hearts of all who heard their tale, the belief would take root that love could conquer all, that compassion could change the world, and that every life, no matter how different, was worth saving. Harlan and Hagna had shown the world what was possible when people chose love over fear, when they reached out to help rather than turn away. And in doing so, they had created something beautiful, something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. Their love was a beacon, a light in the darkness, a promise that no matter how dire the circumstances, there was always hope. And that hope, that belief in the power of love, was the greatest gift they could have given to the world. The story of Harlan and Hagna was not just a romance. It was a revolution, a quiet but profound change in the way people thought about each other. It was proof that the old barriers could be broken down, that the old hatreds could be overcome, and that a new world, a better world, was possible. And it all began with a single act of courage, a single moment of compassion, a single choice to dig through rubble and save a life. Everything else, all the love and joy and hope that followed, grew from that one seed of kindness. In the end, that was the true magic of their story. Not that it was perfect, but that it was real. Not that it was easy, but that it was worth it. And not that it was simple, but that it was true. Harlan and Hagna's love was a testament to the best of what humanity could be, orc and human alike. It was a reminder that we are all more similar than we are different, that we all want the same things: to be loved, to be valued, to belong. And it was a call to action, a challenge to everyone who heard their story to look past the surface, to see the person beneath, and to choose compassion over fear. Their legacy lived on in Emberfall, in the children who played in streets where humans and orcs walked side by side, in the families that blended cultures and traditions, in the community that had learned to value diversity rather than fear it. And it lived on in the hearts of all who believed that love was stronger than hate, that kindness was more powerful than cruelty, and that every life, every single life, was precious and worth fighting for. Harlan Xander and Hagna Xander had lived a love story for the ages. They had faced impossible odds and overcome them. They had lost everything and gained even more. They had been tested and proven true. And in the end, they had shown the world that love, real love, the kind that sees past all barriers and refuses to be denied, could change everything. Their story was complete. Their love was eternal. And their legacy would endure forever, a shining example of what was possible when two people chose each other, no matter the cost, and built a life based on love, respect, and unwavering commitment. And so, as the sun set on Emberfall and the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, the spirit of their love continued to shine, a light that would never fade, a hope that would never die, and a promise that no matter how dark the world might seem, love would always find a way. Their journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth every step. And as their story passed into legend, it carried with it a simple but profound message: that love knows no boundaries, that compassion can change the world, and that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to create something beautiful. Harlan had dug through rubble with his bare hands until Hagna was free. And in freeing her, he had freed himself. Together, they had built a love that would last forever, a love that would inspire generations, a love that proved once and for all that the human heart has no limits when it chooses to love without condition. And that was the end of their story and the beginning of countless others. For every person who heard the tale of Harlan and Hagna would carry with them the knowledge that love could conquer all, and that the world, no matter how broken it might seem, could always be healed by the power of compassion and the courage to care. Their love had started in rubble and ended in triumph. It was a love that had changed the world, and it was a love that would never be forgotten.